Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Vegas Legal Magazine podcast. I'm Mark Fierro with Vice President of Fierro Communications, Jeff Haney. Tyler Morgan has the day off. Thank you so much for joining us today. The courts are a place for settling disputes. It's the one place we condone violence, taking people away to prison, emptying bank accounts because our system of justice says it is the only way to make things right, or as close to right as we can approximate. Our immigration courts have the ability to break up families, sometimes forever. Non-citizens can be removed, perhaps never return to the United States. Our guest today, noted immigration attorney and advocate for those caught up in immigration reform, Eva Garcia Mendoza, recently had a case that took years for an American citizen to settle. He was denied schooling, kept from his ailing mother, and jailed. Eva Garcia Mendoza, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mark.
It seems, if you just go by the headlines writ large, that we are in a crush of deportations. But the truth is, under Obama, some of the numbers are actually quite staggering. 256,000 deportations. That ICE reported last year. In Obama 2009 to 11, there were 385,000, and on 2012 under Obama, there were 400,000 deportations. What's actually happening? Is it just meaner, or we see it more?
Well, under Obama, they were getting rid of the bad hombres. Under Trump, in fact, it was in the news, I believe, this morning, where I believe it was the city of Las Vegas said, we're going to report people that have an unpaid traffic ticket to ICE. That's the difference.
It's bad for people who like to eat, and bad for people who like to have houses built, because that's where our workforce comes from. We invite them, and then we turn around and say, oh, we're going to put you in jail for a while.
Yes. And then I get a call from their employers, their neighbors, their relatives, and said, what can you do? And said, well, now he's got to post a bond, and he may or may not qualify to stay here. And it's a terrible thing that tears apart these families, and especially their children, because the children don't understand what's going on, but they know that there's a problem, and they know that they may never see dad again. You know, it's really, really bad. And then the courts, the thing that the immigration courts have been put under these edicts from their bosses. It says you will deport so many people, you will not exercise discretion in favor of them. And now the immigration judges who set up a union have said, we need our independence. We cannot be pawns of the administration. But so far they are. And in Las Vegas, we don't have exactly alien-friendly immigration judges either.
So is the main idea that under the Obama administration, they were targeting more serious criminals, individuals with more serious infractions in this arena, and somewhere along the line between then and now that tactic changed?
Yes, exactly.
And was that with the new administration coming in?
Yes, with the new administration, that was zero tolerance. For example, if you were in deportation court, and there is a reason to close your case because maybe you can get a green card through another way, you can ask the court to do an administrative closure to allow you to pursue this other remedy. Now, under Jeff Sessions, he said the judges no longer have the authority to do administrative closure cases. So I have a client who fled Honduras because of the gangs and everything else, comes here, marries an American, but entered without a visa. He presented himself at the border and he said, I'm seeking political asylum. He then is held for about 3 weeks. He pays the bond, he gets out and comes to his family here, and this is where he meets the girl that ends up being his wife. So we have it all ready to go, but his asylum, even though he got a prima facie approvable case, they said, yeah, we think you have a good case. They don't just give it to him. They still put him in deportation court. His hearing is not for another 2 years. So I filed one motion to administratively close his case so that we can file for a waiver. The waiver is required when you enter unlawfully. And then you go back to your home country, go back to the American consulate in the home country, and finish processing for your green card, and you come back in, you have your green card. But you have to first take care of the court matter. So I filed my first motion to administratively close, and the judge came back and said no, because under this case that was not decided by a court but was decided by Jeff Sessions, he said courts can no longer administratively close cases. I said, okay. So I told the client that. I said, we'll have to pursue the political asylum case in 2 years when your court hearing comes up. So then there was a case that came in out of the Fourth Circuit. Now we're in the Ninth Circuit. So the Fourth Circuit said, no, Jeff Sessions' rule is crazy. It's unconstitutional, and courts can indeed administratively close cases. So I renewed my motion with the judge, and the judge comes back without even getting an opposition from the government attorneys, and he says, well, that case doesn't apply to us because that's the Fourth Circuit, not the Ninth Circuit. And so my client is still in a pickle. I'm sure there's a case going up through the Ninth Circuit. It just isn't there yet, because the Ninth Circuit is supposed to be just a little bit more liberal than some of the other circuits.
You've been involved with immigration, overview of immigration, your entire career. One of the outstanding names when people are in trouble, you're their hope. Is there a way out of this? Is there some light at the end of the tunnel? I'm all for borders. I think they should, absolutely. And I think if you enter illegally, there are laws that protect us. We have to have budgets. But the cruelty, the inhumanity, is there some way that this gets unwound?
Well, I mean, these people are coming here to work. They're not coming here for a handout.
And most of them hope to return, right? They want to go back home eventually.
Most of them say that, but very few do, because once you establish roots and you have generations of people, then you stay here.
Who are you going home to?
Yeah. I remember telling my dad many years ago when I came really close to buying a condo down in Cabo San Lucas, I said, my dad was born in Mexico but was an American citizen, had been so for over 50 years. I said, Dad, wouldn't it be nice for you to live here? And he says, my home isn't here. My home is in the United States. And so that's what happens. They really don't go back.
That's interesting perspective, because you always hear the former story, that they're working to
because what
to get
happens,
back home.
Excuse me for interrupting, but what happens is you go back and you visit, and then you say, it isn't the same. You know, when you're much younger there, you see it with the different color glasses, but then that you've lived here and you see the benefits here and you see the way of life here, it's a lot easier way of life, and at least the corruption is not open like it is in most countries.
I brought you a case recently of a person who had evidently got some bad advice along the way. They had entered the country once or twice illegally, and now they had a marriage and left the United States briefly. That was like the worst. They have to wait 10 years to reapply?
What happened in that case is this American citizen marries a gal who entered the country illegally. Under Obama, he set up a rule and said, look, if you only made one unlawful entry, we can forgive that. And you can apply to get it forgiven while you're in the United States before you ever leave to go to the consulate interview, say, in Juarez. But we only forgive one. And so they hired an attorney. They claimed that they told the attorney that the lady had 2 unlawful entries, not 1. So the attorney applies for the waiver. The waiver gets granted. So she sends them on their merry way to the consulate in Juarez. For some reason, people, if they told you that they only came in once, and then when they're in front of the consular officer, they have a come to Jesus moment, and they spill the beans. And so I always tell my clients, tell me the worst that you've done, and please answer correctly, because I'm trying to help you. If there's going to be a problem, I want to know about it, and I'm not going to send you out of the country and now have you separated from your family for 10 years.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to this lady, although this lady claims she did tell the attorney that she had 2 entries, but the attorney then checked databases through a Freedom of Information and said, your name doesn't appear anywhere. So I don't know whether she had a come to Jesus moment or whether it did appear in another database somewhere. And they said to her, now you've lied, because in your paperwork you said you only had 1 entry and now you've had 2. and now we're going to get rid of we're going to cancel your waiver that you got in the United States, and in 10 years you can apply and we'll see if we'll let you in. So now the family is devastated. The husband has to drive down to San Diego, cross the border to Tijuana to see her. He's got to support now 2 households with he and the children here, and mom in Mexico. Very, very sad story. And so when a client tells me I've had 2 or more entries, I said, I'm not sending you out of the country. He says, but nobody knows that I had 2 entries. I said, I don't care. I know.
Yeah, find out.
And I don't know what kind of pressure these consular officers put, but that is becoming a very, very big deal now, is they will grill you and threaten you with jail time and everything else if you don't tell them the truth.
You mentioned in your first case political asylum. I was wondering what is the difference between political asylum and other types of asylum, and what does it take to qualify for that?
Well, all asylum, it's all political asylum, and what you have to prove is that that you are being persecuted in your own country, either by the government or by a group that the government is unwilling or unable to stop, and that you're being persecuted because of your race, religion, nationality, national origin, or sex. And so then you have to prove that you're a member of this particular group, that either the government or this other group is targeting you and other people like you.
So a group that the government is unwilling to stop, that could include gangs, right?
Yes.
Is that difficult to prove and find success for your clients?
The judges come up with the most novel ways to find why you shouldn't win, and Las Vegas is probably at the top of the list of denials of asylum cases.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. It's one thing when you have citizens of other countries that find themselves on the wrong side of ICE or Homeland Security, but there are people who are American citizens who either don't speak English for whatever reason, and they're being caught up in this as well, aren't they? I mean, they're being questioned left and right for their appearance, and they're American citizens.
Well, remember that movie, what is it, Born in East LA or something, with Cheech and Chong?
Yeah.
It's exactly right. I had a client who, his mother and father came to the United States. The father used to work in the U.S. as a bracero. Bracero was a program where they would come and work the agriculture seasons and the various crops. And so
they were invited.
He came with a valid visa, so he got to know the United States. At that time, which was in the 60s, if you had a child who was born in the United States, that child could petition for you. And that was done as a result of a court battle that was fought, and the government agreed to allow that to happen for a certain number of years. And so those were called the Silva Levy people, L-E-V-I. And so my client's parents decided that they wanted to have a child born in the U.S., so they traveled by bus from their small town, which took like a day and a half by bus to arrive in Matamoros, Texas, which is right across the Rio Grande River from Brownsville, Texas. And so they get across. So dad's got his bracero permit so he can cross, and then mom borrows a border crossing card from some acquaintance or somebody from Matamoros that gave it to her, and they cross the border. They meet a midwife. The midwife then assists the mother in the birth of their child. They then go back to Matamoros to wait for mom and the child to feel better before they make the trip. While in Matamoros, they meet a friend from the small ranch, and I mean, what are the chances that they would meet a friend? But they said, "Oh, we've got a little boy," and so the person makes the trip back to their small little ranch and says, "Oh, by the way, such and such Escobedo family just had a little boy born in Brownsville." Well, some do-gooder neighbor decides that he, without being asked to by the parents, that he's going to go register this child as if he was born in the United States, in Mexico, even though the child nor the parents were even back in Mexico yet. And so he registers the child as having been born in Mexico 7 days after his real birth, and he doesn't even know his first name. He registers him as Martin when his name was Mario. And so at the age of 18, Mario grows up in Mexico. finishes 6th grade. When he enrolls for 7th grade, he and a friend get called into the principal's office, and they said, you know, you weren't born in this country. You were born in the U.S. because he was registered with his U.S. birth certificate. And you can no longer go to school in Mexico unless you go to some office, and he never did identify the office, and get something that will allow us to have you continue your schooling. So his parents, who didn't have higher than a 3rd or 4th grade education, they just left it, and he didn't do anything. At the age of 18, he tries to come to the United States, tries to enter through through Laredo, and they take away his birth certificate and says, this is phony, and they don't let him in. Fortunately, he had another copy. So he's got an uncle, and his uncle is flying into Houston, so he comes with his uncle. He's flying through Hobby Airport or whatever it was, and he gets in. And so once in Houston, he decides to apply for a U.S. passport. So he applies for a U.S. passport. The U.S. passport agencies, part of the Department of State, decides that he's making a false claim to U.S. citizenship and makes a referral to what was then INS, Immigration Naturalization Service, and they put him in deportation proceedings. And then they threaten him, an American citizen, because he was born in this country, and as you know, the Constitution says anyone born in this country is an American.
Who had a real birth certificate that the authorities in America were claiming were fake.
He had a birth certificate issued by the state of Texas, yes. So what the family didn't know is that 4 years after his birth, the midwife had been arrested, and she confessed to having done a lot of fake birth certificates. She never named my client as one of those people, but nevertheless, then my client, along with many others, I suspect, because she had like 5 books of names of kids and dates of birth, and so Texas did what's called an addendum, or a flag, on his birth certificate. And my client didn't know that, never got a chance to ask for a due process hearing to challenge that. In the meantime, I think the midwife was in her 80s at that point. She pled guilty to 1 count of filing a false birth certificate, was fined $50, and that was the end of it. But she has ruined the lives of a lot of people who now have these flags. So he then gets put in deportation proceedings in Houston, Texas. And they're threatening him that he's going to be in jail a long time, and why doesn't he just fess up, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, okay, well, I don't want to be in jail. I'll go back. I don't care. He's 18 years old. And they put like a $10,000 bond on him, and he said, there's no way I can pay the bond. Fortunately, he had a very caring immigration judge, and so he appears before the immigration judge without counsel, and the judge says, where were you born? And he says, well, I was born over here. And the judge says, are you sure? And he says, well, I was just a kid. I was weeks old when I left, but I've always known that I was born here, and I have a birth certificate. And the judge says, let me get you counsel. And so counsel was unable to get a special visa for the mom to travel from the small ranch in Mexico. Mom comes in and explains in detail how long it took them, where they stayed, what the midwife's house looked like, and all of that stuff. And the judge believed that she was very credible, and said, even though you don't have the burden of proof, I say that you have met your proof by clear and convincing evidence, and the deportation case was dismissed, and he gets released.
So that's the end of his problems, right?
Right. That's the end of his problems.
No problem.
He's 18, 19 years old. He then applies for a U.S. passport. They ask the immigration court to send a copy of her decision to the Department of State. They do, and he gets a 10-year passport, and he's great. That passport's about to expire. He applies for a second renewal, or a first renewal, and that gets approved. He then moves to Nevada. He applies for the second renewal, and they come back and said, well, we have some questions. We want you to produce to us a series, like 10 different documents.
This is from an American citizen.
Yes.
And the judge says he's an American citizen.
Yes. And so he comes to me, and I said, well, this is nonsense. So I send the Department of State a copy of the judge's decision. And then they ignore me. They don't respond to me. They write to my client again with almost the identical letter and said, we need these documents because there's some discrepancies. And so I called them up and I said, what's going on? A judge has already ruled that he's a citizen. And go, well, a judge rules that he's not deportable. An immigration judge doesn't rule that he's a citizen. So that's our job. So I filed a lawsuit against them. And for 4 years, or almost 5 years, we're in litigation. By this time, his parents are so old and sick that they cannot travel. Fortunately, I don't know what, I got a brilliant idea to call the immigration court in Houston. I said, do you guys, by any chance, at that time they used to, the judges used to tape record in a little recorder, they'd turn it off and on, the hearings. And then if there was an appeal, they'd send the actual cassette tapes to a transcriber who would transcribe them. If there's no appeal, the cassette tapes just stay there. And so I called them up, and 3 days later they called me and said, we found 3 of the 4 tapes, but they're not transcribed because no appeal was done because the government never appealed. They accepted the judge's decision. I said, can you send me those tapes? So they send those tapes. I get them transcribed here. And then I, as I say, it just took so long to get the trial, and my client was just so desperate. So we get the trial. The attorneys for the government, there's 2 of them that are from Washington, D.C., that are fighting me on this. And they present no witnesses. All they say is we're relying on the fact. Oh, and by this time, Mark, another interesting thing is I got a hold of the Texas Bureau of Vital Statistics, and I said, look, I need a birth certificate. And they say, we can't issue you a new one. And I said, why not? I says, because it's got this addendum. And I said, well, what do I do to challenge it? And they said, you have to request a due process hearing. I said, okay, I want a hearing. In the meantime, it just so happened that my client had received a phone call from some investigator from the Bureau of Vital Statistics that was actually investigating his case to see if his birth was genuine or not genuine. Oh, wow. And so he concludes that he could not prove that his birth was not genuine, birth in the United States. And so I'm talking to the one of the clerks or whatever they're called, the registrars, and I said, look, you already have an investigator from your own office that says they cannot prove that he was not born here. And she said, yeah, but that's not enough. You have to have a hearing. And I said, okay, I want a hearing. I'm not admitted in Texas. I had to go through the process of finding an attorney to sponsor me to get me admitted in Texas. And right before our hearing, I said, who is the deputy attorney general that's going to be opposite me? And they said, well, it's so-and-so. I said, can I talk to her? So I talked to her and I said, are we really going to do this? I said, your own investigator says you can't prove the case. And she said, let me talk to my client. Calls me a few weeks later and said, we've agreed to get rid of that addendum, get rid of that flag, and issue him a clean birth certificate. So I showed that to the Department of State attorneys. They said, that's not enough. They said, we have this Mexican birth certificate, and we're relying on that. And so we go to trial in front of my good friend, James Mahan, federal court judge, very well respected. And he just was so angry at the government for what they did. It was almost embarrassing because he would argue over the argument of the attorneys, and then when they were doing closing argument, he says, what do you mean this Mexican birth certificate? These people did it without the parents' knowledge or request, didn't even know when he was born, where he was born, or his name.
Other than that.
And so they keep saying, well, we don't believe that the investigator or the immigration judge did it correctly, the Texas investigator. And I said, the immigration judge? Why didn't the Department of Justice appeal if they didn't think she did a correct decision? Why didn't they appeal 30 years ago? And of course, they had no answer. So as they're continuing to argue, you know what Judge Mahan does? It just surprises the heck out of me. He starts to recite the nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb, over their argument. So they're trying to argue, and he's saying, Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. And I go, oh my gosh. So anyway, and the judge issues, and this is very seldom done in federal court especially. It's a bench trial, which means there's no jury. So when we finish our argument, the judge just leans into the government. He says, this man is a citizen. He's got a mother that's dying, and I can't believe you've done this to him. And I want a passport issued to him within 7 days. That's it. I don't want any ifs, ands, or buts. Of course, they have 30 days to file an appeal if they want to appeal. So they go back to Washington, talked to them on Monday, and they said, we're done with this case. We're not going to appeal. And I said, great. Now, how long will it take you to issue the passport? So they did get it done in about 7 days. Then I said, okay, now there's the other matter. When we sue the government and we win, you have to pay my client attorney fees and costs.
Sure, absolutely.
And so I filed a motion. And then they said, Eva, let's see if we can settle it. And I said to them, look, I've heard this story before. You told me you were going to try to settle the lawsuit, and you did not. But they did. They didn't pay him exactly what I charged him, but my client was happy with what he got. So anyway, he had to fight the government twice, and he wins twice. But now, I mean, he's still afraid. He says to me, I don't think this is over. And I said, no.
Not be afraid.
Now we have a federal judge issuing a declaration of citizenship to you that can never be taken away.
And I can see a day when that won't matter.
Yeah, I can see his point too. At this point, he must think it's never going to be over. It's
Yes.
just going to
30
be
years,
continuing
right?
to be
30
one thing after
years.
another. Yeah.
Yes.
And for those of you who have listened to this, the issue got some great coverage in the Nevada Independent by Michelle Rindels and Luz Gray, and a great story. And they're doing some great work over there. So the Indy is doing great work, and this really is. This is an American citizen, 30 years. Jail, court, everything separated from an American citizen.
And threatened with being in jail for a long time. Yes.
Where do we come out on the other side of this? I've always said, America's like a big pendulum, and things go one way and then they come back the other. It seems to me that there's a way out of this. You think intuitively America is too great a country to not come to some sort of balance. You can't invite people with wages to work in fields, to work on framing our houses, to wash cars, to do all of these other things, and then turn around and say, we're sending you to jail. Is it?
Mark, it's worse than that. We have a program for people with university degrees called the H-1B program, where a company will sponsor you because you have a degree and because they need someone with your skills, and the job always requires someone with a university degree. Those used to be a piece of cake. There was no problem. Now the government is scrutinizing them like you can't believe. They're scrutinizing the employer, they're scrutinizing the worker, they're holding up their visas. It's crazy. And another thing they did is they limited them to $65,000 a year. We used to have 130,000 visas, and they cut them back to half of that. And so what happens is you get these companies from China or India that bring all these high-tech people, and they may file several thousand or 10,000 of those per year. And so I'll say to my clients, I can file it, but it's a complete lottery. I don't know if you're going to get selected or not selected. No. So everybody has to file the applications by April 1. And if you get selected and if you pass everything, then October 1, they will give you your visa. But now they're not giving you the visa in October 1 because they're looking at them again and looking at whether the employer can afford to pay you the prevailing wage that the employer said they was going to pay you, and looking into whether your degree is proper or not proper. And if you've had have a foreign degree, you're supposed to do what's called a credentials evaluation. So you get a professor or someone from the university that's used to looking at foreign degrees to give you an evaluation of that it is equivalent to an American degree. They're challenging those also. I mean, it's just so many obstacles that they're putting in front of us for the bright, educated, and rich people, as well as for the poor people, like you say, the gardeners and the dishwashers and the housekeepers and babysitters and those kinds of people.
I guess the knee-jerk answer is, well, sooner or later, Trump's out of office. It doesn't go away with the president, though, does it?
No, you need Congress. You need Congress. And Obama, I mean, we had, Obama set up DACA, the Dreamers.
Outline, we throw this term around so much. Outline exactly what Dreamers are. Just give us a thumbnail.
The Dreamers are kids that were brought here by their parents. So the kids entered illegally with their parents, but they have been here their whole lives. So they have graduated from high school, they're in the university, but they didn't have, at that time, they didn't have a driver's license, they didn't have work authorization. So once they graduated from high school, they had to fallen off the earth because they couldn't drive and they couldn't work. Fortunately, a lot of states, including ours, when we had Governor Sandoval and the legislature in Nevada passed a statute that said, we are going to give them not driver's licenses, but driver's permits. Now, driver's permit cannot be used for ID purposes, but it allows you to work. And you know what? That helps you, that helps me, that helps you, because now because we know these people are driving, whether they have a driving permit or a driver's license or not. And if they have an accident, at least they'll have insurance.
Yeah, that's the first thing that happens.
Yeah. So it helps all of us because now there's insurance to pay. So the Dreamers now, they have to not have been convicted of more than 2 misdemeanors or 1 significant misdemeanor or a felony, and they have to be graduates or enrolled in a GED course. So graduate from high school and are enrolled in a GED course and have been brought to the U.S. before they were the age of 15.
15 is the magic number.
Yes.
And so all of those people are now once again thrown back into a gray area. They don't know if this program is ever going to be.
Correct. But and then what did Obama do? He came in and proposed a DAPA to take care of their parents. And of course, Congress just would have none of that, and the court ruled that he couldn't do that. And that's what he's tried to do with DACA. Fortunately, that the courts have stopped Trump from terminating that program, because now these kids have had DACA for years, and they consider this their home. But it's not a pathway to any kind of citizenship or residency. So we still have to find another way to keep them here.
So what is the next step as far as that goes? You mentioned Congress. Does it ultimately have to come down from the federal level, or is it something that can be possibly addressed on a state-by-state basis?
No, unfortunately, immigration is a federal issue. Yes.
So all federal has got to get by Mitch.
It has to get by Mitch, and that's what happened before. Is Mitch has been stopping a lot of these things. Yeah.
Well, we pull with one hand in California and push with the rest of the country because agriculture demands massive numbers of workers, and then on the other hand, we arrest people.
Now, I don't know how much time you have, but a very important issue happened this week. 3 different courts, New York, California, and the state of Washington, San Francisco, and the state of Washington, all ruled that the Trump administration cannot change the public charge rule. Public charge is when someone is immigrating, we have to show that they are not going to become a public charge, that they are not going to be receiving benefits, food stamps, welfare, or institutionalized medical care.
Walk in and get government assistance.
And you have to have a sponsor, and the sponsor will say, I agree to be responsible for them for 5 years until they can become a citizen. Okay? So now Trump is trying to change that. So it used to be that if your loved one, the person that sponsored you, did not make 125% of the poverty wage as income, and that including his whole family plus you as the immigrant, that you could get a co-sponsor. Well, the Department of State a year ago just snuck this in without going through proper rulemaking channels and decided that to have a sponsor, it had to be a close family relative. Okay. Then the Department of State came in and said, I have a case now where I was ready to send my lady to Ciudad Juarez for her interview. Her husband is permanently disabled. He adopted 4 of her children. Very, very, very nice family. But he's permanently disabled, so the family gets Medicaid and food stamps. I can't send this lady to the interview in Juarez because she will be denied and will be separated from her family, because part of this non-rulemaking the Department of State has done is saying even U.S. citizen children, U.S. citizen spouses who are receiving these public benefits, we believe that if that's the case, you will also become a public burden, and therefore we're going to deny you the visa.
The topper to all of it is this happens to people, dreamers included, who go into the military, risk their lives, in some cases get shot up, suffer from the outcome of those injuries for the rest of their lives, and one of the first things the government does is moves to deport them whenever they get a chance.
Yeah. First, you're not supposed to even qualify to go into the military, but when we need them, they take them.
They're in.
But we also have a program called Parole in Place. So if you have a spouse who came here illegally, if your spouse is in the military, your parole in place is like you entered legally and you should get your paperwork. But there's also a lot of talk that they're going to get rid of that program.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have definitely fought the good fight, and for that we commend you. You are the whiz when it comes to all things related to immigration for all Southern Nevadans, and we appreciate that.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for being here today. With that, We call it a day, the Vegas Legal Magazine podcast. Sincere thanks to Eva Garcia Mendoza, the law firm of Garcia Mendoza and Snavely, for joining us and doing the great work that she does for the community, all of its members. Tyler Morgan will be back next week. Jeff Haney, Vice President of Fierro Communications, the friendliest PR firm in the state of Nevada. Remember to like and share the Vegas Legal Magazine podcast on Facebook. You can catch us on YouTube, iTunes, or Stitcher. And for all of you out there with a story idea, or an axe to grind, get a hold of Vegas Legal Magazine, the leading magazine in Southern Nevada legal market. You can call Tyler at 702-222-3476. Reach out, tell us, tell your friends. Have a good one. We're out of here.